Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Feel free to like or dislike the video as you see fit, so feel free to hit those buttons. Feel free to comment below, and I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to share my videos as much as you like because the purpose of this channel is educational in regards to atheist and deconversion issues and any issues related to those issues. A hearty shout out to the Rabyd Nation. Join the nation by hitting that subscribe button, and if you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, hit the join button, and your membership options, which would lead to citizenship in the Rabyd Nation, will be presented to you. Today I want to continue on in my series called Deconstructing Spiritual Disciplines, where I'm looking at the spiritual outward discipline of submission. Now that word, let me get the elephant in the room out of the way right away for all of us deconverting. That word, submit, has been so abused and used by religious people that many of us that are deconverting, we automatically have a trigger response to that idea of submitting in a religious context. Now, I think all of us acknowledge that we all submit to something, either out of necessity or out of desire, because of just being human beings. There's always, the law, there's always government, there's always stuff that asks us to submit to it. And though I tend to take a more, Robert Heinlein kind of, approach to submission. If it doesn't annoy me too much, I'll submit to it. But if it's just a hassle, I'll break it, and do what I want anyway. I realize that my own morality now is my own, and I am the one morally responsible for what I do. I don't try to get away with it because God told me to do it or whatever. And I certainly don't submit to something simply because that's what I'm supposed to do. I always think about things. I'm an atheist and a libertarian now for good reasons, because I recognize how both religion and politics try to manipulate us and try to get us to submit to something. Well, I don't do that anymore without a healthy dose of skepticism. And that's what you really can do to, I think, get over the negative aspects of what you submit to. To me, submission now means to be willful, that it has to be a choice on my part. Now, a lot of people do willfully submit to religion. Now, here's the thing, what is submission according to Richard Foster and the Celebration of Discipline? Now, I'm going based on memory, so if there's something I miss here, but I felt that Richard Foster, when it came to submission, had a pretty standard Christian response, a Western, 21st century response to the idea of submission, that the Bible asks us repeatedly to obey and follow and whatever. And if we're going to be biblical Christians, if we're going to be all this other stuff, Richard Foster would have submitted to us that whatever the Bible tells you to submit to it. And he would go into the benefits of submission, that, it allows us the freedom to do other things because we don't have to think about them or we don't have to question them. We just, we just submit to them on that basis. Now, I think he makes a caveat of, you're not supposed to submit to a leader that is violating the word of God, whatever that means. And so the idea of submission is God comes along and says, this is what I want you to do. And you don't argue about it. You just do it. Okay. And there's a real idea in Christian submission in particular of submitting to this might makes right God. He's the God, so therefore if he says it's wrong, then I'm not going to do it. The problem with this, and this, I'm going to talk first, let me talk first about how this taps into our humanity. We have all had moments in our life where we zigged when we should have zagged. We've all had those moments where some sort of life-controlling problem has gotten a grip on us. We've all had those moments where we didn't feel like our life was going all that well. And along comes this idea, this church, this religion, or whatever that comes along and says, if you follow our path, all the things that are wrong right now with your life will get better. And so we do that. Now, I think what this taps into is I think there's many moments in human realization where we realize that what we're doing is not going well. And rather than do the hard work of finding out what it is that's not going right, what the reality of the situation is, it's much easier to accept somebody else's version of reality and submit to that and submit to the tenets of that than it is to do the actual work of coming up with your own moral philosophy, of coming up with your own goals, of coming up with your own things in your life that are self correcting of when you make problems. And so, what does it appeal to? I think the idea of Christian and religious submission appeals to the easy button that we all want to push when it comes to the hard moments of our life. And I'm not saying that, because I've titled this, Can an Atheist Benefit from Submission? And I think there is a benefit to submission as long as submission is done not in a negative place, but in a positive place. I think there's a reason why religion plays on the vulnerable and gets people to submit to the religion, submit to Jesus, submit to whatever in times when people are at their lowest. It's interesting that in every evangelistic course I've ever learned is you go to a person when they're in a vulnerable state. I was taught as a minister, funerals are the best time to evangelize, because everybody's in grief and mourning. And, you can play the card of, hey, they're in heaven now, so, you don't want to miss out on seeing them again. So you do this, submit to the religion, submit to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, believe in his resurrection, and you'll be saved and you can see your friend again. And you take advantage of everybody's grief and sense of loss and their desire to see their loved one again one more time. When people are in life controlling problems, you come along and say, well, the direction of your life, if you try this, there's a lot of people that have tried Christianity. I remember when I was in the Assemblies of God Teen Challenge was big. I don't know if they still are, but, it's like this idea of if you take your addiction or your life controlling problem and replace it with another addiction of religion, yeah, that works. Okay. It practically works, but now you've added a whole bunch of things that may not be true, but it's just another addiction. What submission taps into is this desire of all of us to be lazy, to find an easier road when it comes to the big questions. And religion comes along and says, if you just submit to this. Now, some of you I already know because I hear the stories of how you were indoctrinated, you were abused in that indoctrination, sometimes physically, sometimes sexually, sometimes whatever. There's a whole list of people probably that watch this channel every day, or at least whenever I put out a video. And the reason they resonate with me is because I'm absolutely empathetic to people that have gone through abuse and stuff in their relationships and in their religion because of their religion. And you need to understand that that's because I know what that's like. I've seen it a lot, and I've experienced a little bit of it. The idea of submission to authority was always a bugaboo for me because I'm like, I want the authority to merit being followed. I don't want them to just be followed because they've got a position. This whole idea that I was brought up with is they're the pastor, they're the authority figure, so if they tell you to do something, as long as it doesn't violate the word of God, do it, is kind of something that was definitely used to mess up my life. Religion can become an addiction too and a life controlling problem. And that's the thing that religion doesn't want you to see when it comes to submission. Submission really taps into that desire for an easy button or for something to change in us in order to make our life better. Now, here's the thing I've learned. There's nothing wrong with submitting as long as the submission is done in a place of where you're in a positive mental state and not a negative one, where you have a chance to evaluate the truth claims, where you have a chance to put your skepticism to it. If religion came at people that were in good places, say, hey, you want to go talk to a person in a good place when they're in the right frame of mind so they can honestly assess the truth claims of your religion, I wouldn't have a problem with any religion. But that's not what they do. They go and try to get people that are low and downtrodden and everything and get them to submit to you because it's easy. You're vulnerable at that point. You want an easy solution. You've dug a hole for yourself and now you got to figure out a way out of it. And the easy solution is just to submit to somebody else's idea that seems to work. Okay, and that's what submission taps into, is this desire to get over the problem quickly. We all have that easy button that we want to keep pushing, and it's not always the best button to push. It isn't. And sometimes the road to recovery from a life controlling problem, for instance, is a long road, and you just need to say that. And we don't want you to replace the drug addiction or the alcohol addiction or whatever addiction you have with religion, which is just another addiction, okay, and has the same problems as that because it causes you to waste your money, your time, and your energy and your life with it when there's nothing to it and it's untrue. Okay, you don't evaluate the truth claims. So, can an atheist benefit from submission becomes a real bugaboo question for most of us because we just like, no, wait a minute. This is what got us into problems. This is what got us abused. This is what got us to waste our life, our time, our money, and energy. How many people submitted to the leadership of some faith preacher and lost all their money? It's like, their whole life savings gets wasted on this crap. And this is the idea of submission to the leader, submission to the Bible, submission to whatever, has been used to abuse people for years. And so those of us deconverting, we have a real hard time with submission. And if I can get you to see past the fog a little bit, there's nothing wrong with honestly assessing if something is valuable to you and that if you submit to it, you'll be fine. I think all of us on a low level, the most libertarian, anarcho libertarian, still submits to the government in certain places because they just don't want to be hassled. Okay, they have this need not to be hassled and they just want to live their life in peace. And so even those guys will submit to the government at times because they realize that if they don't, they'll just be hassled. At the same time, if I go into something in a good frame of mind and I decide to submit to a certain philosophy of life or a certain way of living, then if I do that in a good place, in a good mental place, then I'm assessing it and being skeptical about it. And, I can evaluate whether it's actually going to provide some good benefit. It's always this cost benefit analysis that we're doing. And I think with submission, when people are at a low place, the benefit at that moment in their mind outweighs the cost that they can't see. Okay. And now, when you're in a good frame of mind, you're a much better place to analyze, well, that would benefit me if I did that, or if I submitted to this idea, or this way of doing things might be a better way of doing things. That's why when I, using my own self as a personal example, because I really don't want to use the example of other people when it comes to submission, because there's a lot of negative stories. But let me give you some positive examples. For instance, I don't want to be hassled by the government, so I do submit to things, file my taxes, and pretty much obey the law. But most of the time, that's just me being a good human being anyway, so most of it I would do anyway. It's when it annoys me or gets in my way, you know, I get really Robert Heinlein on that and say, well, I'll just break it and get away with it. But, it just kind of heads that direction. So it doesn't happen often, trust me. And that's the kind of mentality I have because I realize I'm morally responsible. So the whole morals question when it comes to submission, I'm learning how to be a good moral person without necessarily submitting anything other than myself. Okay. I want to be in a place of freedom. I want to be in a place of good thinking and in a good mental state when I make decisions of what I submit to. And it's in those states that I have over the years, I became a Stoic as far as philosophy because when I was in a good frame of mind reading Stoics, I said, this fits my personality. It's very pragmatic to the way I live, and the following after virtue and just being a decent human being without the whole religious connotation just really appealed to me. And so over the course of months of reading and I think Stoicism is for me and I went after it. The same is true most of my life for minimalistic philosophy, being a secularist, making sure church and state are separated. These are ideas of, that I've submitted to because I've studied them out in a good frame of mind, in a good place. And I think that's the real issue. Don't submit to something when you're at an emotional low point. Rather, assess things skeptically, and if at a high point in your life, or at least an average time in your life, and you're looking at something and say, that can really benefit me if I just submit to this idea. Make it your choice. Make it a choice that you make in your freedom to submit to somebody. That's real, genuine submission to me. Don't submit to a leader unless you really feel that they merit it. Now, some people have positional power. Like when I go to work, there's a policy of the company involved. I have bosses that tell me what to do, so I have to do that if I want to keep my job. But I see the benefit of that, and I've seen the benefit of that all my life. And so I don't have a problem with submitting to that. As long as the relationship, but even in that context, relationships aren't allowed to get abusive. Okay, you know, harassment and stuff like workplace is prevented by a lot of laws as well as policy of the company. And so there's certain rules and parameters of submission within certain contexts. That's not necessarily true with religion. Religion can get off the rails real quick when it comes to submission, to the point where people martyr themselves or whatever, or go out and do stuff that's very detrimental to themselves because the leader or the religion told them to. And that's what we're trying to avoid. The real thing here, guys, is with submission, as far as the atheist is concerned, it needs to be a skeptical, rational evaluation of what you submit to. And you're going to submit to something, okay? Sooner or later, we all kind of just like hit that easy button because it's just the cost benefit analysis says, the cost is too high for not submitting here. But at the same time, I think we want to make those assessments where we're in a better frame of mind, where we're not at a low point where we've zigged instead of zagging like we should have. We don't want to be in this emotional low point when we decide to submit to something, because it puts us in a very vulnerable position. And I certainly think on the flip side, if you are a person in authority, you don't want people submitting to you when they're in a vulnerable state. Okay, because that gives you incredible power over them, and that's not something you should be seeking after, because that's a little bit deranged, in my opinion. Okay, so make sure that if you're in an authority position, you're a boss or you're a leader or something, you don't want people submitting to you because they're in a bad emotional state. You want them to assess, hey, if we all get together and this is the vision and this is the stuff, then this is what we can achieve. Then that's a better framework and a better frame of mind for all your people to assess it. Because if they're in a better frame of mind and say, yeah, let's follow this vision, then it's going to be much more beneficial to you as a leader than when you're asking people to submit to you in a vulnerable state. Okay? And that's kind of, I think, the whole issue with submission. Can it benefit me? Yeah, and it has. I've submitted to certain philosophies. I submit to certain leaders in my life because that's the way it is. And probably the best example that's a little bit more closer and personal home is submitting to my therapist from time to time, trying things out that she suggests. But that's a mutual relationship where she never asks me to do that when I'm in a vulnerable place, okay? When I'm in a vulnerable place, she says, okay, when you get into a better frame of mind, this is what I want you to consider. And that's the way to do it. That's the way to be, submissive to somebody. And over time, I've submitted to therapy because it has more of a benefit than a cost to me. It costs me an hour of my time a couple of times a month, and a lot of personal time researching things and coming up with solutions. But over the course of several years now, it has benefited me immensely. Well, that's me willfully submitting to something when I'm not in a vulnerable place, but in a better place, and trying out ideas when I'm in a better frame of mind. That's what you want to do. And I think that's kind of where I want to leave this video today, because I think the Christian idea of submission is nuts. Okay. I think the religious idea of submission, any religion that requires you to submit, just don't think about it, just submit, is nuts. Okay. I just don't follow that anymore. I think you need to be in a place before you submit to something where you are not in a vulnerable state of mind, not in an emotional low point, not in a low point of your life. Instead, do that when you're back up on your feet a little bit. There's nothing wrong with telling the person trying to evangelize you with their, whatever spiritual woo they're saying to you, you know what, I'm not in a really good place of mind right now. Let me take that from you and I'll think about it when I'm in a better frame of mind. If they have a problem with that, then you need to stay away from it. It's not a good thing for you at that moment. All right, that's my thoughts on it. For those of you deconverting, if you watch this video, I'd be very interested in some of your thoughts and ideas behind submission. as a spiritual discipline in your life. I always like to hear the stories, even so some of them are bad, because they just remind me of certain things about religion that I need to be reminded about. So I appreciate those, even when they're dark stories at times. And submission seems to have a lot of dark stories around it. And I'm just trying to pull away all of that and say, there might be some benefit to this if you're in a good frame of mind to assess what you want to submit to. Make it a free choice, not something you're doing out of desperation or trying to hit the easy button. That's all I'm saying. Well, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. I leave those things in for some reason. Oh, to make me look more human, because I am a human. But I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. And, you know, the channel's really growing, and I've just been overwhelmed by some of the generosity of some people and how people are doing things. And just thank you very much. You guys just do this old atheist, former preacher atheist, a lot of good. Warms my heart a lot. And that's genuine. Thank you very much. And as always, live your best life. You only get one go around, and then it's over. And so you don't want to waste your time on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. But rather give yourself to building up your own life, building your relationships with the people you love and care for, and making this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.